Some of you have never heard of Aaron Brummit. That's okay. If you need a creation scientist to tell you that you know God exists and that you love him, you don't really need Aaron for that. Eric Hovin, to name but one, is more than enough. But I am all for free speech, and Aaron Brummit deserves some, despite what the Springfield, Missouri police force may think. Plus, just when you think creation science is done and sealed, there's always a new discovery. If I was God, I would be very angry. I, that's God, which I'm not, would like my supporters to, please, stop coming up with new stuff in my defense. The more you come up with, the harder it is for me to defend them. So imagine my surprise when Aaron Brummit came to me one day and introduced me to a colleague of his. "Meet Asimo," said Aaron, beaming with pride. Asimo was beaming as well and shook my hand. He had a firm grip, and I had to make a note to go to the doctor and get an artificial hand, as there was no point in waiting for my arm to evolve again. "He's a robot," said Aaron. I forgot to mention it, but Aaron Brummit is not quite a creation scientist yet, but he is the next best thing, a science fiction creator. "Nice to meet you," Asimo has said, and turned to Aaron. "Very impressive. A wonderful creation." I'm not sure if you're aware of the fact that when you see a creation, you can assume with confidence that someone, a creator, has created it. "Would you like to know how he was created?" asked Aaron. I absolutely did, and said so. "Why don't you ask him to tell you his own heartwarming story?" asked Aaron. "It all started with a big bang," said Asimo, and proceeded to tell a story of how a supernova exploded and the elements from which he evolved were created, followed by 7 billion years of metal evolution, at the end of which a central processing unit evolved inside what looks like a human skull and plugged into the mains for the first time. It was a very long story, and the sun was now a red giant which killed all living things on Earth, except for us, oddly enough. But Asimo was still talking, and I was still listening with interest, and Aaron was still beaming with pride. The more I listened to Asimo's story, the more believable I found it. It had an uncanny similarity to another fantastic story of evolving and struggle, the evolution of organic life, which until this conversation I thought was unique. Then, 5 billion years into Asimo's story, Aaron put his arm around Asimo's shoulder. The robot was about to tell me how a finger flicked a switch, and he studied life as a creation scientist, but he stopped just before the word creation. "Thank you, Asimo," said Aaron. "They'll do for now." He unplugged his colleague from the wall and said to me, completely and rudely ignoring his friend and colleague, "He's talking too much." "Why did you have to murder one of God's creations?" I was very distressed. Aaron just stood there and smiled. I was beginning to suspect foul play, you see. I am not a man of faith. If somebody tells me a story, I begin with skepticism and work my way slowly towards faith as the facts unfold and support the story. But sometimes the story is so good that I momentarily forget to apply my skepticism. "You are a man of strong faith," said Aaron. It was not meant as a compliment. From a skeptic, I would expect to smell a rat earlier than 5 billion years into the story. "What do you mean?" I was scratching my head. Asimo's story was a perfect proof that evolution did not need a creator. "I don't know how to tell you this without destroying your worldview," said Aaron, but it took me about 20 minutes to create Asimo using off-the-shelf parts and Google Plug. If you haven't heard about Google Plug, you can, for a modest sum, connect your brain to Google and so know everything at all times, and Google knows everything about you at all times. If that sounds to you like science fiction, you may be on to something. I named him after the great science fiction creator, Isaac Asimov, said Aaron, referring to the great prophet whose prophecy stats were 25% and improving with every passing millennium. But you must agree that my creation is nothing like God's. Me, for example. I looked at him for a moment, and I was beginning to believe that man, in this case Aaron Brummit, was the greatest creation the universe has ever seen, and thus a proof of the greatest creator the universe has ever seen, namely God. But then Asimov pulled the plug on Aaron Brummit's central processing unit. I was about to ask the robot why he murdered God's best creation, but he just shrugged his hips and said, "I'm only fighting for free speech."